This conference will now be recorded.
Hello,
All
everyone.
right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for our presentation of sexual assault in the LGBTQ community. My name is Melanie Jackman. I'm with Montgomery County Women's Center. We'll be hosting this event. We're very excited to have Angelique Setchell with us from the Montrose Center. She's going to be presenting for us this morning. So take it away, Angelique.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Hope all of you are doing well. Thank you for joining us. This is the first time I've ever done the presentation over online, so bear with me. All the technical difficulties, sorry about that. But so like Melanie said, I'm Angelique Setchell. I'm with the Montrose Center. I am the anti-violence program specialist here at the Montrose Center. We have a lot of programs here at the Montrose Center. The anti-violence program is just one of them. So we used to be called the Montrose Counseling Center, but they kind of dropped off the counseling part, and it's just the Montrose Center now because of all the other services that we offer. So we still primarily focus on offering therapy to the LGBT community, but our therapy services are offered to anyone as long as you're LGBT friendly. You can access services here. So for a lot of people who need a sliding scale and don't want to use their insurance or don't have insurance, they can get on grants and different types of things like that to access therapy. So we have that option. We also have HIV case management. We have a SPRI program, which is seniors preparing for their rainbow years. And so they meet several times a week and have potlucks and all those kinds of things. And right now, what's really awesome about that program is Fred, who spearheads the whole program, he's actually delivering. He's kind of Meals on Wheels right now, delivering to those seniors that they can't come to the center right now and those kinds of things. So kind of trying to work around all this stuff with COVID. We have our Hatch program that is for our youth between the ages of 12 and 20 years old. And they also meet several times a week and do different type of programming, those kinds of things. We've also partnered with communities and schools. And I know, I don't think Montgomery County has communities and schools, or if y'all do, it's very few of them. They typically housed within those schools that are at risk or have high dropout and those kinds of things. And so we partnered with them to create what's called safe zones. And that program is where our therapists go into middle schools and high schools once a week and do therapy sessions with those students. So like right now we're trying to coordinate to do those online as well, those classes, just to kind of keep up with our LGBT youth and those kinds of things. We also have a lot of other services. So if you go and check out our website, whenever we're up and running, we have a lot of different classes like mindfulness and yoga. We have our trans group, our trans fabulous group. We have our polyamorous groups. We have all these different kinds of things. We have people who come into our center and host like AA and NA meetings. We have people who are housed on our first floor, like PFLAG with their parents and friends of lesbian and gays. We have the Living Mosaic Church. And so we have a lot of things going on when we're up and running at full capacity. There's always something going on here at the Montrose Center. And I always encourage anybody whenever, you can, and we're back up, to come out and take a tour or to come and access one of the classes or those kinds of things. And on our website you can see those classes that are open and those that are closed, like our sexual assault and domestic violence group that we have. Those are closed groups, and they have to be clients that we're actively seeing and that would be a good fit for the group. So that's pretty much all the services we offer. We also have an IOP program, which is an intensive outpatient program for substance abuse and alcohol. And anyone can access that as well, but they have to be LGBT friendly, and it is geared towards the LGBT, but we've had other people access it as well. So if you have any questions about the Montrose Center, or I know my contact information and all that stuff, I'm pretty sure that Melanie can send it out. And if anybody has any questions, definitely ask. I'm going to try to pay attention to the chat, but if not, I know Melanie is watching as well. So what I usually start off with, right now I have like allergies and they're driving me crazy. So I usually start off with the LGBT alphabet and just kind of go over like a brief summary of the LGBT alphabet. I know a lot of people You know, we're all learning about the alphabet. I've been working for the Montrose Center for almost 5 years, and I do know a lot about the community, but I'm still learning. And there's new terms that pop up all the time, and I'm kind of like, what is that? A lot of times the youth are the ones that teach me and educate me about these things. And so I just always want to put a little disclaimer out there. If you have any questions, you know, this is a safe space, and as long as, you know, we respect the community, those kinds of things is what matters most. There's no like dumb question or anything like that, especially when it comes to the alphabet. There are a lot of terms, and I do have a list I did provide, I think, to Melanie, and so she could email that out of other terms. I usually try to cover the biggest terms that you typically hear on a regular basis. But there are new things, and there are other things that you may hear. So definitely check in with that. I know that list has a lot more included. So the first part of the alphabet, the LGBT, gay and lesbian. So typically, you know, most people know what gay and lesbian is. You know, gay is somebody who is a male who prefers to be physically, romantically attracted to other males, and then lesbian is for a female. So one of the big things that people always kind of ask me is what's the difference between bisexual and pansexual. So and kind of explaining those two things. And so one of the biggest things I try to explain to people about bisexual and pansexual, a bisexual person is somebody who is attracted to male and females. Sometimes they may be more attracted to one gender as opposed to the other, but they still, you know, equally have those kinds of attractions. When it comes to being pansexual, that person is kind of saying, they're saying, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're male or female, or if you're transgender, or how you identify gender-wise, or even sexuality-wise. And so I'm going to date you if I feel that emotional connection and attraction to you. I'm going to date you. So that's really the big difference between bisexual and pansexual. And a lot of the terms that I talk about right now are in regards to sexual orientation. The last one here on the slide is transgender, and that refers to gender orientation. So I'll come back to that one in a minute and try to cover more of the sexual orientation one first. So the second part of the alphabet is Q. So that's going to be questioning. It's going to be somebody who may be questioning their sexual orientation, or maybe even their gender orientation. So they're really not sure. I don't know if I'm quite, you know, gay or lesbian or bisexual. And also, you know, they may be struggling with, I was born biologically a female, but I don't quite feel female. And so where does my, you know, gender lie on that kind of continuum? And so that's kind of how we look at sexuality. It's on a continuum, and we kind of fall along those lines. Sometimes, you know, we are attracted to men, sometimes we're attracted to women, sometimes we kind of lie in the middle or prefer one or the other. And so, you know, questioning that sexuality as well. The next Q is queer. So that's going to be somebody who, this term is an old term that a lot of people in our senior program and those people that are older in the LGBT community really don't embrace this word. They really, because of the negative connotation that it held back, you know, in the 70s and 80s, and how it was used so derogatory, they don't embrace this word. But the youth have kind of recaptured this word, and they say, okay, we want it to mean something special and unique and different, and not to have that negative connotation that's attached to it. And so it's just somebody saying, you know, I'm queer. They may not say they're gay. They may not say they're lesbian or bisexual. They just may say that they're queer. Or they might say they're queer lesbian or a queer gay person. But it just basically means, you know, I am out and I'm proud and I'm part of the community, and, you know, I love myself. And so you will hear the youth use that a lot more than older people. The next part of the alphabet is I, so that stands for intersex. And so this is the new word for that formal word that most people may have heard, hermaphrodite. So someone who has male or female biological, internal, external genitalia. And so that's the term that's used now for people who are born that way, that they're intersex, rather than using that old term hermaphrodite. The next part of the alphabet is asexual. So a lot of people get kind of confused with this one because they're kind of not understanding, like, well, How can somebody identify as asexual? You know, if they don't want to have sex, does that mean they don't want to have a relationship or have, you know, a partner? And so that's not necessarily true. A lot of people who are asexual do want to engage in a meaningful, you know, emotional attachment relationship with somebody, but they just have no desire to have sex or have any kind of sexual interaction. And so that can be really hard for somebody who has a partner who wants to engage in sex, but this other person is not, is asexual. And so that can be really kind of difficult to navigate around. But the person does still want to engage in sex. And not sex, they want to engage in a relationship and you know, that emotional connection, but just not engage in sex. The next part of the alphabet is ally. And so that is somebody who typically is not part of the community, meaning that they don't identify as being gay or lesbian or bisexual. They're typically somebody who's heterosexual. And so usually that's somebody who is a family member or a friend of somebody who is part of the community. And or they just want to be an advocate and say, you know, I believe that everybody should have the right to love who they want to love and be with who they want to be. And so they're an active part of the community. The Montrose Center definitely embraces allies. It's really important for there to be allies out there fighting for the community and being a part. But sometimes the LGBT community, that those are who are part of the community, don't really want to include ally as part of their alphabet. They love the allies, but they don't always want to say, okay, they should be a part of our community or part of that population. But like I said, at the Montreux Center, we embrace it. Most people love the fact that there are people who want to support the community and are activists in the community. So, so that's very important, at least, you know, within the Montreux Center family. Some other terms that you may hear on a regular basis is gender nonconformity. So that's just going to basically kind of how it sounds, somebody who doesn't conform to that gender role. So, you know, typically people say, you know, women are supposed to wear makeup and have long hair and wear dresses and look a certain way. And so a lot of times, you know, in the past, we may see a woman who has short hair and a button-down shirt and slacks, and a lot of times people may refer to her as being a butch lesbian, and that doesn't necessarily mean that person is lesbian or identifies as being lesbian. There's a lot of women now that dress more androgynous or dress more neutral, and they may be completely heterosexual, not even identify as part of the community, and they're just not conforming to those gender roles or what society says women are supposed to look like or men are supposed to look like. So they could definitely identify as being heterosexual. So not making those kind of assumptions that just because somebody looks a certain way or dresses a certain way that they're a particular, you know, they have a particular sexual orientation or even a particular gender identity. I went over pansexual. Then another part of the LGBT alphabet is polyamorous relationship. So this is going to be a relationship where there's more than one person, more than two people involved. So there would be three or more people involved in this relationship. And so everybody is aware of one another. Everybody, there's kind of rules and boundaries set in place within these relationships. So everybody kind of knows what's going on and everybody's aware. So there's no secrets or no secret partners or anything like that. So this can be really hard kind of a relationship to navigate. As we all know, having a relationship with one person can be quite difficult sometimes. So adding more people to the relationship can make it even more difficult. But a lot of couples find it very like fulfilling to have more than one partner in a relationship because where they don't get some needs met, that other person meets those needs. And so they can find it, you know, very beneficial. We do have a polyamorous group here at the Montrose Center that meets once a week, and it's really, a lot of our couples find it very helpful just to kind of talk about things and the issues that are going on in the relationship and stuff like that. And so another term is demisexual. So that is a term that I find pretty interesting, and that the youth use this word. And, you know, we typically think of youth as kind of being a little like aloof in the fact when they hook up with people and not really engaging in a meaningful relationship and just kind of like sleeping around and hooking up and those kinds of things and having fun. But a lot of the youth do use this term demisexual, which means that I'm not going to engage in a sexual relationship with anybody unless I've had developed an emotional attachment to them and a meaningful relationship. And that's the only type of people I'm going to engage in a relationship with sexually. And so I find that pretty interesting that they kind of deem this a term that they like and they embrace. Another term I don't have on here yet, and I need to add on here, is something that you hear a lot is non-binary and binary. So a lot of people don't feel like they quite fit when it comes to gender, a particular gender. So they don't want to identify as being trans because they don't quite feel like they're trans. But they may be born biologically female, but they don't quite feel female, but they also don't feel identify as being a male either. And so they typically will identify as being non-binary. And so somebody who's non-binary will use the plural forms. So I identify myself as she and her, but somebody who identifies as being non-binary will use plural forms of like they, us, and them. And so that can be really hard to navigate sometimes whenever we are working with clients who identify as being non-binary, because we're kind of ingrained in us as such a young age, like learning, those pronouns and how they identify to a certain person with the way our brain sees it. And so it can be really hard when we have a client that identifies that way to remember to use those terms. And I mess up sometimes too when somebody says, I refer to, I go by they and them, to remember to use those terms when I'm talking to them, or even when I'm writing a note in our system and stuff like that. And so a lot of times when I realize, I messed up and I used the wrong term, I just correct myself and move on. I don't kind of harp on it, because typically that will make them feel nervous or make them feel like they're not okay with how they identify. So just kind of like apologizing and moving on is what I typically try to do. Because there's even people here that at the Montrose Center that, identify as being non-binary. And even in our emails sometimes, or in meetings and stuff, we still may use the wrong terms, and we do the same thing with each other. Just trying to respect, how somebody identifies when it comes to that. And so I said I would go back to transgender. So kind of going off of that gender identity when it comes to, non-binary, there are people who do quite, feel a certain more feminine or more masculine, and maybe they're not born that way at birth. And so the way I try to explain to people when somebody identifies as being transgender is like, for myself, I was born biologically a female. I identify as being a female. My brain and my body biology tells me I'm a female, and my brain tells me I'm a female. And so that makes me a cisgender, cisgender person. And then if I wanted to add my sexual orientation in there, I would call myself a cisgender heterosexual female. And so somebody whose brain and biology don't coincide, that there is, their brain tells them they're female, but their biology tells them they're male, that person is going to be a trans female. And if somebody was born biologically a male, and somebody was born biologically a female, and their brain tells them that they're a male, that person is going to be a trans male. And so when those two things are not congruent, that person identifies as being transgender. And so transgender people can be at different stages of identify as transgender. So there's people that are still presenting, they're born biologically a female, they're still presenting as a female, but they already know that they're transgender. They're just not dressing the part or acting the part. They're kind of what we call a stealth transgender person. Nobody really knows that they identify this way. There's other people that kind of are different stages. Somebody who started to talk about taking hormone treatments or on hormone treatments to kind of start changing their body to identify, to make them more visibly identify as how they identify in regards to their gender. And so at that point, a lot of times, for a male, they'll start developing a little more softer areas and breast and more hippie, kind of lose less facial hair and those kinds of things. And then there's people that may not be on hormones and they start dressing the part first. So they, look the part. They're just not on those transitioning hormones yet, because that can be costly sometimes if they're not able to get covered and stuff like that. And so then there could be the people that are on the pills. They have they're dressing the part and all those kinds of things to identify with how they identify. And a lot of times people always ask questions about surgeries and stuff like that. I always tell, because I know we're interested in those kinds of things, but I don't ever ask clients those questions unless they're willing to talk to me about those things. Most of the time, transgender people don't ever have bottom surgeries, meaning that they never have any kind of surgeries that will change their biology, how they were born. There are some that do go overseas and have like risky surgeries. Here in the United States, there's only 2 places, California and Houston, that offer, bottom surgeries, but they are risky. And a lot of times people later down the road, if they have them early in life, they have a lot of issues with like urinary tract and all those kinds of things down the road. But there are some, when in regards to top surgeries, meaning that women who are born biologically women, but identify as being male, they will have their breasts removed. And so one of the great things right now, at least with insurance, some insurances, they will cover top surgeries. So as of late, not too long ago, I heard that like the military also offer top surgeries for people identified as being transgender. But with all the things that happened with politics and transgender people not being recognized anymore in the military, I don't know if their insurances still cover those things now. But I know there are other places that do cover that. So but there are a lot of transgender people that want to have those surgeries because it helps them be able to feel more like themselves when it comes to their body. Because sometimes, even if they identify a certain way and they're dressing the part and taking the hormones, that biology part is still there. And so they can really, really struggle with that. And also talking about pronouns with transgender people, obviously can be pretty difficult if somebody comes in and says, hey, I identify as being a trans female, but in front of us, they look like a man, they're dressing still like a man, but they're identifying as a trans female. It can be really hard for us to use the pronouns she and her because our brain is seeing a man in front of us. And so even with that, just asking a client who is trans, how do you, what are your pronouns? What do you go by? What name do you go by? Because sometimes they don't go by, their name that's on their driver's license or their name at birth. Sometimes clients are like, I don't care, you can call me whatever, or you can use whatever pronoun. But I try to make sure that like I make clients comfortable and use the proper pronouns. I always try to tell them like, look, I know I identify as being a female, and I'm a cisgender person. But if my name is Angelique, and if somebody calls me Angelica, or something different than what my name is, Angela, I said most people get offended, if you told somebody your name over and over and they continue to call you the wrong name. So I don't like that for myself, and I wouldn't want to do that to a client, no matter how they identify. And just kind of getting them to understand that, because a lot of times they will disregard themselves, just like, well, it doesn't matter. But it does matter, and it's important. And especially people who may not even know what transgender are, and they may be struggling with this and not really sure, they may be dressing the part, but they don't know why. I've had clients like that in the past. They were from a different country. And so when they came in and they had experienced domestic violence, he had told me at the time, he was identifying as he, that the police laughed at him. And I asked, why did the police laugh at him? And he said, well, because I was dressed like a female. And so, I asked, do you cross dress? Do you identify as transgender? Well, because he's from a different country, he didn't even know what the word transgender meant. And so explaining that to him, and later down the road, months later, he finally identified as being transgender and understood like why. Okay, now I know why I dress this way and why I'm this way, because I really prefer to be a female. And so they could be even at a stage like that where they don't even know that they are transgender, because they just don't know these terms or even how to identify. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions in regards to these terms. And so, the military, we're paying for the surgeries, like I mentioned, but because once that last law went in effect maybe about 6 months ago, where transgender people weren't identified anymore, I'm pretty sure the insurance don't cover that anymore. But they used to, which was a great thing for those for those people who are identifying as trans. And so, yeah, it can be very costly to have to pay out of pocket now for them to, I mean, even just in regards to their healthcare in general, I mean, they had that option as part of the military, and they fought for our country. And so now even just having basic medical services and like going to the VA and stuff like that, they can't access those services anymore either, that I believe of, from what they told me when I went to the military base. I think it was about 5 months ago, and so they had talked to me about that. And so, yeah, it was pretty devastating, that they can't access these services or much less access any other services because they're just not recognized anymore. So that's very sad. So I'm going to go on. If you have any more questions about terms, definitely throw it out there. If there's any terms that I didn't cover that maybe you hear regularly, or have any questions about the ones that I used, definitely ask, please. I don't want to feel like I'm flying through this, but I know it's a little bit harder when we're not in person and people ask questions. Okay, so I'm going to start with sexual assault and the LGBT community. So 1 in 3 women will have been abused in her lifetime, and that's pretty kind of reflective of seeing heterosexual women who experience sexual assault. But really, I think within the LGBT community, we see those numbers tend to be higher. It's just that reporting, they don't come forward and report these things happening. And then the same goes for men. 1 in 6 men would have been abused and has sexually assaulted in his lifetime. And that number is probably much higher. It's just back to that reporting. And then within our community, transgender people have a very high number of sexual assaults, domestic violence, hate crimes, all those kinds of things. And again, capturing that number can be really, really hard with the transgender community, just because they're very fearful of police and anyone that may, re-victimize them. Unfortunately, they are victims to sexual assault and domestic violence and hate crimes and human trafficking. And then when they do reach out to police or to an agency or something like that, they tend to get re-victimized or not get the help that they really need, which can be very hard. And so they typically will stay away from accessing those services when something like that happens. And I'll explain a little bit why transgender people kind of don't see when they do experience sexual assault that it is a sexual assault, and they typically think it's their fault and why these things are happening. And so moving into that, one of the big things within our community is internalized homophobia or internalized transphobia. And so as you kind of can see the image, there's kind of like a lot of things going on. And so it's a thing that our community experiences. There's a lot of people within our community that take pride in who they are and love who they are, but they still hear kind of those internalized tapes playing. So, from a small child, they're taught by parents and church and, media and everything around them that being gay and lesbian, transgender is wrong. And therefore that means there's something wrong with me. You need Jesus, or you need medication, you have mental health problems, you have a substance abuse problem, you're not really this way, that's not the way God made it, kind of all those things that you hear. And because of that, when people find out you're part of the community, you experience all these other, cultural issues. And, even though you want to be who you want to be and you want to be out and proud, you still struggle. I see clients all the time that identify as being part of the community, and they're like, I love being part of the community, I love being gay, I love everything about my community, but I grew up in church, and I'm a pastor's child, and my family doesn't accept me, they don't know that I'm this way, and so I wish that I wasn't this way. Even though I love being who I am, I really wish I wasn't this way. And sometimes I want to just like women. And I've heard, clients say those kinds of things. Or I wish, a transgender person that identifies as being a female, I wish I could just be a man, because it would be much easier. If people could just understand, like, don't you think I wish I could just be a man? Because it would make my life, less stressful and less problems. But that's who they are, and that's got to be who you want to be happy. But they still are kind of experiencing all these internalized things that are going on. And so it's a really big struggle. And because of that, the LGBT community tends to experience things because they have that internalized struggle. They do develop more, substance abuse issues. There's a high rate of substance abuse issues in our community. They tend to have issues maintaining jobs sometimes, or maintaining relationships, and doing those kinds of things, because it's just really hard for them to be who they want to be, but also struggle with everything that they hear from the outside, and then believing those things to be true. And so when they experience sexual assault or domestic violence or any of the things that bad that happened to them, they feel like it's their fault. Like, this is my penance. This is my punishment. If I wasn't this way, then these bad things wouldn't happen to me, and it wouldn't be God punishing me for being what I shouldn't be. And so they really struggle with that. So when they experience like any type of difficulties or problems, they tend to internalize that and believe it's their fault. And this is what they deserve in life. And so they don't reach out. They don't go get help. They don't do any of those things because they just feel like they don't deserve that assistance or that help. So some things to keep in mind when working with LGBT people who've experienced sexual assault, working with working with lesbian survivors. So one of the big things is somebody who identifies as being lesbian typically do not have sex with men. That would be somebody who identifies as being bisexual. But so if they've experienced a sexual assault from a man, they don't typically think about things like pregnancy. Pregnancy is something that's not at the forefront of their mind, unless they're in a relationship and they're talking about having children or going through the process of adopting or in vitro or any of those kinds of things. Then they may think about, there's a possibility I got pregnant during the sexual assault. But usually that's not the case. And a lot of our clients, we have to talk to them about what that may look like. There's a possibility that during this, sexual assault, that they got pregnant, and what does that look like, and what plan B might be, and all those kinds of things to kind of navigate and talk about with them. Another thing is risk of STIs. In the lesbian community, they have the lowest risk of STIs, sexually transmitted infections, amongst any sexually active community. So typically lesbians don't go get tested. They don't have, regular testing when it comes to STIs, just because they don't, transmit or contract any type of STIs. So if they've experienced sexual assault, talking to them about those things and getting tested and following up, especially when it comes to contracting HIV and AIDS, they have the medication that is PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. And so that's going to be the medication that's used within that window after they've experienced a sexual assault, to take that medication to prevent them from contracting HIV and AIDS. Now you may hear a lot of kind of commercials on the radio and even on TV now. I'm seeing more frequent are PrEP commercials, which are pre-exposure. And so that is a medication I always tell people, just kind of going back to the community, like, it's important for anybody, not just LGBT, but anybody who's sexually active that may not always use protection and all those kinds of things, to get on PrEP and take it correctly. Because if you do, according to what the doctor says, and take your medication correctly, there's a 99% chance that you will never contract HIV and AIDS if you're on that medication and you're sexually active. So even getting on that is very important. Some other things to keep in mind with lesbian survivors. A lot of times people think, if they've experienced sexual assault, it's from a man. It's not typically always true. They don't always have these things don't always happen with men. There are women who sexually assault other women, and it's kind of like a taboo thing. A lot of people don't like hear that happening, or that, that's got to be really rare. And it really isn't rare. It does happen at a higher rate than most people think. I've had clients who have come in and experienced a sexual assault from a woman. One in particular, she worked at a university, and so she was still kind of in her beginning stages of working and that kind of trial period. So she didn't want to report it because she was scared that she would lose her job. How was she going to prove this happened to her? She said that this person consistently would make passes at her, and the person was somebody in a higher position. It wasn't her boss, but she was a boss in a different area. And the lady had been there 13 years. My client had only been there a couple months. So she's like, if I go report her, they're going to fire me. They're going to believe her over me. I have no proof, all these things. But my client continuously started to struggle with mental health issues, having anxiety. And she was always typically somebody who was very strong and outspoken. And so she finally broke down and said, I really think I need to report this. So 6 months later, she reported it to the campus police, also to HPD. And I had to tell her from the beginning, that unfortunately 80% of all sexual assault cases, and that's just not part of the community, but 80% of all most sexual assault cases, when they are tried or brought, some kind of charges against them, they don't stick. Those people get off. And then when you think in the context of LGBT sexual assaults, that number is probably still in that same area or even higher, where those people get off and don't get held accountable for that. So I had to tell her in the beginning, like, this is going to be an uphill battle. I'm not going to lie to you. The likely chances of you, for her getting charged with these crimes, this crime, and being held accountable, even at her job or by legal stuff, is going to be really slim. But being able to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself is the biggest part of this, and having your voice, not kind of be silent anymore is kind of that therapeutic process that if you really want to go through this, it's going to be tough, but we can do it. And so she decided, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pursue it, even if I lose my job or what happens. And so they did investigate it. They did pull camera tapes and different things like that. And they were able to see that the person went into her office when it happened on campus. But the thing was, we can't prove what happened in that office. Okay, we can believe that you said this happened at this date and time, but we can't prove that what happened in the office. And there's no evidence and those kinds of things. And so, unfortunately, the person did get off. They didn't get held accountable for it. But some of the things I definitely tried with the client, she did unfortunately lost her job. They said that the position lost its funding, which we knew that wasn't the case. They just wanted her out. But like I told her, one of the good things that could at least come out of this is that it's on file now with almost at the college. Sorry, it's on file now with the college, and if something were to happen again with another person, if this person was to perpetrate on somebody else, because most likely they've already perpetrated on somebody, and that person just didn't come forward because they're very fearful of this person being someone that had this power, and nobody would believe them. But now at least it's on file, and if it were to happen again, maybe the next person they would believe that this person is perpetrating on people and sexually assaulting people and using her that power and control to do these things. And so but my client struggled a lot. But even after all that, she really felt like the system let her down, everybody let her down, but she did feel better, like that she was able to get that out and kind of put that voice out there and show that person, like, look, I'm not scared of you. Yes, you made me lose my job, you made me go through all this, but I still spoke up, and what you did. I know what you did. Just because everybody else isn't can't prove it. And so that really did help her, and she went on, to get a better job, thank goodness, and continued therapy and all those kinds of things. But it can be really hard for those people that experience, same-sex sexual assault, to prove those things, or even to come forward and say this happens to me, because a lot of people, the first thing they're going to say, well, how come you didn't fight off that woman? Like, you're a woman, and how can you just let somebody sexually assault you? And those kind of dumb questions people ask, even when men are sexually assaulted by other men, they get asked those questions. Well, you're a man, why didn't you fight back? You could have overpowered him, you could have done whatever to make this stop. And getting people to understand it's still part of that same concept of power and control. And even if you're a bigger person, or you could have fought back, it doesn't sometimes do that fight and flight, freeze mode, those kinds of things kick in sometimes, and just some people are just not geared towards fighting back. And that can be really difficult for people to understand, but kind of getting them to understand that that's what happens in these situations with sexual assault, even if it's same-sex sexual assault. And so a lot of times when women, experience sexual assault by men, they, especially within the community, lesbian community, they kind of start struggling with some of the things that, can I really identify as being lesbian anymore? Because, I experienced a sexual assault by a man. And so during this act, I felt something, or like my body reacted in a certain way, like I got lubricated. And so they start questioning, like, am I really lesbian? Like, how did I, how messed up am I that I got, my body reacted to a man? Like, does that mean that I do like men? I just never, tried it, or thought I didn't like men. And so getting like them to understand that, our body is geared towards protecting itself. And even when we, maybe cannot fight somebody off, or, get away from this person, our body's going to kind of go into that mode of protecting itself. And so, to reduce the risk of as much trauma to your body, and your body is going to do those natural things like lubricate and, react even in a situation like that you're not, asking for. And so getting them to understand, like, this is something that happens doesn't mean that you can't identify as being lesbian anymore, that you're not lesbian, or that you're confused, or any of those things. But getting them to understand, like, this is just something the body does in order to protect itself is really important. Because then they start having issues if they do have a partner with like penetration, and like a lot of the psychology behind it can be really difficult for them. Some of the other things that I don't know if people have ever heard of is a gold star lesbian. So, somebody asked a question about EOC. So we did that. We filed an EEOC claim and did all those things. They investigated as well in conjunction with the campus police and HPD. And so EEOC, because she was still in that trial period of working, they said they couldn't do anything for her. Like, she was already a permanent employee, and they could have done something, but because she was in that trial period, and they let her, they released her from her job during that trial period, EEOC said that they couldn't do anything to protect her because of the way that Texas is a right to work state, and that kind of stuff kind of is what didn't help her. So unfortunately, EEOC didn't do anything about it. And so we did talk about maybe filing a civil case because she lost, employment and money and all these types of things, and she had to come to therapy and access, therapy, the cost of all these things. So did talk about that, but at the end she decided she didn't want to do anything civil. She just wanted to let it go because the girl was still acting kind of crazy. She showed up at her mom's house one day and all these different things. And mom even testified to that, but they said, well, mom could be lying, those kinds of things, what was presented. So, but going back, thanks for that question. But going back to some of the things I think I mentioned, Gold Star lesbian. So there are, I find it pretty interesting that even people who are in the community do not even know what a Gold Star lesbian is sometimes, and it's some term that I didn't know when I first started working either. And a Gold Star lesbian is somebody who identifies as being a lesbian, but they've never had sex with a man. So it's kind of like a community within a community, meaning that there are lesbian people that will only have relationships with other lesbians that have never slept with a man. So if anybody maybe have experienced a man, or maybe has had a child, a lot of lesbian women were like, I'm not dating you or talking to you because I just don't want that drama of you leaving me for a man or going back to that person that you were with if you were ever with somebody else. And so when they experience sexual assault, a lot of times they struggle with this, like, more so than the actual assault and the trauma. What if that community finds out that I'm no longer, somebody who has not been touched or had sex with a man? And so if they have a partner, they're very fearful sometimes to tell their partner, or even to tell that community that this happened to them, or, to pursue any type of legal stuff because somebody might find out. And so they'll struggle more so with that than the actual trauma. And we've had partners that have found out that their person was, sexually assaulted by a man, and they've left them because they just can't handle that struggle that person starts to go through with the trauma and all that stuff. and knowing that, this happened with the man and those kinds of things. But most of the times we do have partners who are very supportive and understanding, and just getting that client to understand, like, this is not something you asked for. This is not something that you brought on yourself. But it kind of goes back to that internalized homophobia, transphobia that I mentioned, that they believe, like, if I weren't this way, I wouldn't have been targeted. Somebody wouldn't have come after me, and perpetrated, that violence on me. And so one of the big things that happens a lot is kind of that idea of someone thinking, okay, I'm going to turn somebody straight, or those kinds of things. So that a lot of times within the lesbian community, it's more, within our community in general, it's more accepting to be lesbian as opposed to being a gay man in our society. And so a lot of times people will be like, oh, it's cool to be lesbian, or it's cool, or, men will be like, oh, wow, I'm going to try to turn her straight for one night. Or if I pursue her and talk to her, you just sleep with me, you'll understand what it's like to be with a man. And those kinds of things can turn into something very volatile, that if you're not accepting those advances as a lesbian woman from this person, the person can turn on them and, sexually assault them and go after them. Kind of like the idea of, corrective rape, if you've ever heard of that term. And it's a term that is not used a lot, but it's something that happens regularly, unfortunately. So it's that mentality of, I'm going to correct a situation that if you slept with a man, you would know being with a man is awesome. And so I'm going to show you that. And so they will do those things. And a lot of times this happens to young girls growing up who may be a little more tomboy, or dress a certain way, or look a certain way, or, play sports, or be more like, appear to be more masculine. A lot of times their family or friends of the family will sexually assault this young girl, and kind of to make that idea that if you have sex with men, you're going to like men. And that's the only reason you don't know that you like men, because you've never been with one. And so sometimes this will happen continuously in a family, or even friends of the family that will do this to this young girl. And it happens to men, but it typically happens to women more often. And I had a client who she's 19 years old, and when she was 15 years old, she came out to her parents. She said that she was a lesbian, and of course, they weren't accepting of that, especially within their culture and within their religious context. They just were not accepting. They told her, no, that's not possible. The only reason you think that you like girls is because you spend more time with women. If you would just spend more time with men, maybe engage in sexual, intercourse with a man, you will realize that you like men. And so they recruited a friend of theirs who had a boy the same age, convinced both of them to sleep together. And so both kids, agreed to this. And as a result of that one experience, she ended up getting pregnant. And from that, of course, that messed up her schooling. She wasn't able to finish high school. She started developing an addiction problem, and also having, struggles within her relationships, being more promiscuous, having more promiscuity, and a lot of things like that. And so her parents were very angry at her, and didn't understand, like, why is she going through this? Why is she doing these things? Why is she being so, acting out of, control? And guess what? She's 19 now, and she has a baby that this other family and boy doesn't have anything to do with. Her parents give her the hardest time, and her life is still kind of falling apart. And she has this baby, and for her to talk to her, it's like, well, this is my fault. If I wouldn't have agreed to do this, then I wouldn't have got pregnant, and this wouldn't happen to me. I wouldn't have not been able to graduate and all these things. I can't get a job, can't maintain a job, have all these other things I'm struggling with. It's my fault. And getting her to understand, like, no, this is not your fault. You're struggling with all these things as a result of this happening to you. And yes, you might have made some choices after the fact that have impacted your life, but it's more so that the fact that your parents convinced you because they thought, because you were identified as being gay or lesbian, that they needed to fix you. and this was the way to fix it, was to get you to sleep with this boy. And, getting her to understand that in the state of Texas, the age of consent is 17. So even then, two 15-year-olds saying that they would agree to this is not really agreeing to it, because the state of Texas doesn't recognize that as, consent. And then also, there's a thing called, that coercive rape, or that coercive sexual assault, that somebody can coerce you into doing something that you wouldn't necessarily do or want to do, but it ends up happening. And so that's what happened. Your parents forced you into doing these things, or to doing this, and then as a result, these things happen. And getting her to understand it's not her fault. She, if she wasn't gay or lesbian, that this wouldn't have happened to her, and getting her to really focus on those things as opposed to, this is all my fault, I messed up my life, everything's me, and not trying to make her put blame on anyone else, but also getting her to understand like this is not solely on her, and that and guess what, she's still struggling with the fact that she's lesbian now, because she still identifies as being lesbian. So even with the man, did not change that, and that's a bigger issue within her parents, because her parents are like, still that mentality, like if you would just, he was the wrong guy, if you would just get with the right one, then you would know, and that's not the case. And so we have this stuff where they're kind of like, that sexual confusion, she still has that, and so because of that, she is being very risky with her sexual activity and stuff like that. But she's still going to therapy, and she's still working on those things, and she's doing much better. But because of all these kind of things happening, she is struggling big time. She's struggling big time. And, for her, it's because she's lesbian, and, this is her punishment, to go through that whole thing. And then also the other thing of like, a lot of times we go out and we talk to doctors and nurses, especially say nurses who do, the rape kits and those kinds of things on the community. And a lot of times, like, well, somebody identifies as being lesbian, and they've experienced sexual assault by a man or even by another woman. It's just going back to having that empathy for that person and being understanding, because we all need those basic like support and understanding. And it really doesn't go back to the fact that you identify a certain way, gender wise, or even sexual orientation wise. It's just being, that common genuineness that you have, and empathy of caring for somebody, if it's in a hospital setting or in a therapy setting or in a shelter setting or whatever setting that you're in, because we may not know a lot about the community, but if you are genuine and you show that empathy and concern, then that goes a long ways. I always tell people, like, if you don't know, ask, because especially within our community, they're super happy to educate you about the LGBT community and give you all that information and all the tea, they say, on it, because they love to be able to teach other about them. And for them, that means it's empowering them, and it's getting them to understand that you're interested in them and you're interested in knowing these things. So even if they've, you're just talking to somebody, or they've experienced sexual assault and they're going through things or identify a certain way, just showing that interest and empathy really goes a long way. And not worrying about like the other part of like, oh, how do I handle this because this person's a certain way. They're still the person in the end, so really following that, and even trying to get my clients to understand like that as well. You're still a person. It doesn't matter how you identify, gender wise or sexual orientation wise. You have experienced a sexual assault, and you're a person that experienced a sexual assault. So let's start there, as opposed to adding these other layers just yet. Because eventually we do have to discuss these layers, but let's talk about just you being a person and having this trauma and experiences, is the biggest part of it. Okay. So some things to keep in mind with experiencing, with male survivors, gay male that have experienced sexual assault, is just thinking in that context of society and how we view gay men. It's not okay to be a gay man. Like I mentioned earlier, it's okay to be more accepting to be a lesbian woman, but it's not okay to be a gay man in this society. We definitely hear more about the community and it appears that we tend to be more embracing of the LGBT community, but still being a gay man is just kind of like one of those outliers, especially just like being a transgender person. And so being lesbian, bisexual just seems to be more accepting for whatever reason. And so when they have experienced a sexual assault, it's something that they typically don't come forward with right away. The only time we typically get those numbers or see a man who is experiencing sexual assault is if it's very traumatic and they end up in the hospital and they have to admit that these things happen to them because they've been, brutally attacked. And so most of the time we do not see people who've experienced males experience sexual assault come forward right away. They usually don't come forward within months later or even years later that they've experienced a sexual assault. And it's usually because just that kind of fear and that stigma attached to it. And they feel like, I can't come forward. I can't tell anybody this. This is so embarrassing for me. This is, people want to know, why didn't I fight them off, or why didn't I do this? And it makes it very difficult. And so we don't typically see them come forward until, their lives are falling apart. They start developing substance abuse. They start losing their jobs, can't maintain employment, can't maintain relationships, developing mental health. All those kinds of things happen. And that's when they're like, look, I need help. This happened to me. And I've been living with this for so long, and I need to talk about it and discuss it. And they struggle with kind of all those things, that internalized homophobia that I mentioned earlier. They really feel like this is their fault. If they weren't, society says that gay men dress a certain way, they look a certain way, they talk a certain way. And if I didn't appear more like a female, more feminine, that wouldn't have made me more vulnerable to this. And so I wouldn't become a target. And so if I wasn't this way, then this wouldn't happen to me. And they really believe that it's their fault and that this is their punishment. For anybody who perpetrates violence on them or sexual assault on them, then it's their fault and this is what they deserve. And so they really struggle with that, and coming forward can be really hard. And so when they do come forward, and so when we think of that context of like when the Me Too movement came out, and we've started hearing a lot of things about coming out about that, especially in regards to the LGBT community, coming out against, Kevin Spacey, who was this big, movie star actor, and these people, coming forward finally saying that he has sexually assaulted them and sexually harassed them over all these years. They waited all that time to come forward, many years later. And people are like, why do people wait so long? Or why did they, why are they barely coming out now? It's been, way too long. And just thinking in that context of this, like, a lot of times they don't want to come forward because of that embarrassment. And in that setting, even more so, like, that's going to affect their career. If they're a new actor, starting off, and you have this other big movie star and you come out and say this person did this to you, that's going to ruin their career. They're probably never going to be able to be a movie star or continue to stay in that field. And so they keep quiet until maybe they become big enough that they know people are going to listen to them and believe them, or they've just struggled with it for so long that they've developed all these issues that they're like, look, I have to come out, because if I don't, it's going to be, at my demise. And that's why people wait sometimes so long because of it, because going back to that power and control. And then also within this community, thinking about, there's that power and control, but then there's these other layers of me being part of the community, how people view me, how they're going to treat me. I'm already kind of ostracized. I'm going to be more ostracized if I come out, and all those things that happen, especially within the gay community, and experience. Another issue within the community is risk of STIs. So as of now, the community really does take pride in getting on PrEP, like I mentioned earlier, making sure if they're HIV positive, making sure they're on their medication so that they aren't undetectable and not spreading the virus, getting tested and doing all those things to try not to be that stigma that society has put on them as the perpetrators of HIV and AIDS. And so because that stigma has been put on them, if they've experienced sexual assault, they will struggle a lot with, I don't want to go get tested. What if I have it? I'm going to be that number that's going to increase those things of STIs and HIV and all those things. And I don't want to. So that kind of fear of, I don't want to do this. I don't want to come forward, because if I have to find out and know, then I'm going to be a part of the problem, not a part of the solution. And they can really struggle with that. Another thing is fear of outing. So a lot of times people will target them because they know they're gay and they may not be out. And so they will use that as a way to kind of control that person, because they know they don't want to out them. or they don't want to out themselves if they come forward and say that they experienced a sexual assault and they were at a gay club, or they were hanging, out with certain people, or different types of things, filing a police report, because the fear of outing themselves, or even the person who's that perpetrator will use that as a way to kind of hold it over their heads. Like, if you go and, pursue this or tell anybody this happens to me, I'm going to tell them you're gay. I'm going to call your family. I'm going to call your friends. I'm going to call your church. I'm going to call your employer. I'm going to do those things as a way to kind of like keep their mouths shut, so they don't come forward and say anything about, because they will out, and that will could ruin their life. And so that's another reason they stay quiet. And then a lot of times when they do come forward and end up going to the hospital and going to get, that process of getting checked and stuff, and that insensitive treatment that they get treated by police officers or even hospital personnel, about that mentality of, why didn't you fight somebody off, or you're a man, you could have done something about it. Even in that, thinking about how women assault other women, there are women who assault men, and sometimes they will even, perpetrate violence on gay men. And it does happen. And so again, that idea of, why didn't you fight a woman off if she sexually assaulted you? Why didn't you do these things? And a lot of time it's like kind of that power and control again. It's going to be somebody who is their boss or in a different position than them, or maybe much older than them. And so they do prey upon them and use those things as a way to control them. But again, it goes back to that feeling of punishment. This is my fault. This is brought on because of who I am. If I wasn't this way, these things would happen. And so it goes to that kind of, I don't have any power and I don't have any control. So who's ever going to listen to me or help me when I really need that help? So talking about gay, kind of talking about those things. When it comes to the LGBT or the gay and lesbian community, they experience kind of the same things transgender people experience, but transgender people experience it in a very different way, or kind of in a different light. LGBT people really will say, like, they know that the sexual assault happened to them. They know, they have some rights. They may not pursue those rights because of those things that I mentioned. But when it comes to transgender people, a lot of times they feel like they have no help, they have no rights. And unfortunately, in the state that we live in, or most of us live in Texas, or come from, that they're right. Transgender people do not have a lot of legal rights to protect them. Meaning that if you are a transgender person and you get a job, if they find out that you are transgender and you didn't tell them up front, or they can clearly tell that you're transgender, they cannot hire you. They don't have to hire you. They can fire you if you're a transgender person, and you can't do anything about it. Like we mentioned a while ago, filing an EEOC, they can't go file an EEOC claim and say that this person discriminated against them for being transgender, because they're not recognized by the state as being a person who can file such a claim because of being transgender. If somebody tries to get housing, or rent a house, buy a house, apartment, they can be refused housing for being transgender. Again, they can't do anything about that. They can't go to HUD and say that they were, mistreated or denied housing because of it, because they're not recognized on the state level for being transgender, being able to purchase a house or rent an apartment, and deny that for that reason. Another big thing in the state of Texas, which is just something that when I started working here, I didn't know about, and it was just something that took me by surprise, is that if somebody experienced, so like for myself, if I experience a hate crime in the state of Texas, if somebody is saying derogatory slurs or something because I am a Hispanic female, I can call the police, make a police report. They try to physically or sexually assault me. I can file that police report, and it will be filed as a hate crime, physical assault, a hate crime, sexual assault or attempt. And so those charges will be brought against that person. But if a transgender person experienced a hate crime state of Texas, they're not recognized as it's not recognized as a hate crime. And so they may just get charges of a physical assault or sexual assault, but it's not recognized as a hate crime. Even if this person is, yelling out derogatory things and saying negative things, it's not recognized in the state of Texas. And so when I do have somebody, and I've had, several clients that have come into my office and I'm sitting down with them, like one, she was in her 20s, and she's somebody that is transgender, but nobody would ever know she's a transgender person unless she told you. And she started hormones at a very young age, and that's kind of another thing. A lot of times if they start at a young age before their hormones kick in and all those kinds of things, a lot of times that does definitely change their body chemistries and stuff. And so for her, nobody would ever know that she's transgender. And so when she came in, she did say that she had a partner. He was in his 60s, and she had been with him since she said 18. I believe it was younger than 18 just by her reports, but she didn't want him to not be in the room with her. I typically don't let people in the room with other clients whenever they come in unless they sign a release of information. But she was like, he's my support. He's been here with me through like my whole life. I want him to be there with me. And so I reluctantly agreed to it. I let him be in the room while I interviewed her and stuff. And so she told me that she had been she always puts kind of ads on Craigslist as an escort, but she always makes sure she puts it as that she's transgender. She never like hides that fact. And so she went to go meet the guy. And as soon as she met him, he attacked her physically. He attempted to sexually assault her. She happened to have an umbrella with her, and she was able to like jab him in the stomach with the umbrella. And that split second, she was able to get away and get help. But in the process, he broke her orbital socket. Her eye was closed shut. Her lips were all messed up and bloody. She had lots of scrapes and bruises. And so we connected her, with services she needed, like crime victims and all those things. She said that this had happened to her before, but she had never come forward. This is probably the fourth time in like the past 5 years. And she felt like this is the only way that she could help make money for her family was to escort. She was saying she wasn't sleeping with these people, but, I suspected otherwise. But she said she, was putting those ads. And her partner that was in the room, very supportive and understanding. But the more I sat with her and talked to her, the more I felt like there was more going on than just what she was saying. But in that instance, everything she was saying to me was like hate crime. The person was saying, negative things about her being attacking her. So in that instance, the police did not file hate crime. They just filed an attempted sexual assault and a physical assault. So I have the FBI that I call, and somebody is a contact, and I tell them, hey, I have a client in my office that I believe who experienced a hate crime, and I need y'all to like look into this case and interview her in these cases. And so we will go and talk to him and get interviewed, and based on that, he will determine like if he believes it was a hate crime, and if he does, then at the federal level, the FBI will take jurisdiction of that case from wherever it is, the HPD, Harris County, Fort Bend County, whoever, Montgomery County. They'll take jurisdiction of that case, and then they will try it as a hate crime because it's not recognized by the state. And so that can be like very difficult for a client who doesn't have an advocate, doesn't have any understanding of how the legal system works, are getting that. So they're already victimized, and then they have to go through all this red tape just to get noticed or get that extra help and support when something like this happens to them. Can be really hard, because if there's nobody there that doesn't know, then that re-victimization kind of just happens over and over because they fall through those cracks and those kinds of things. So we were able to connect her to those services and get her, and the FBI picked up her case and stuff like that. But as we continued with her situation, I started to see that her husband was very supportive, but also kind of thinking, there's something else going on here that's just quite doesn't sit right with me. Her age when she first met him and all these things, and kind of doing this escort stuff, kind of made my red flags go up about human trafficking. And so obviously it's not something that I could talk to her about with him present, but she was going So the way my job works is I am the anti-violence program specialist, and my job is hybrid in that I do a lot of case management and intervention and education with my job, but I also do therapy, but I can't do therapy with the clients that are a part of the anti-violence program. So I do therapy with other people. So in regards to this client, there was a therapist that was going to see her that we connected her with. And in that instance, I talked to the therapist ahead of time and said, when you do her intake, please, ask her these questions, especially in regards to human trafficking and different things. Because there's a lot of times that transgender people, things are like this are happening to them, but they don't recognize it as human trafficking or even see it. And so that's one of the big things that we see within the LGBT community, especially those young kids who end up on the street that are part of the community. We need those basic things to survive, especially when we're a child, clothing, shelter. And so when they come out to their parents, they tell their parents, hey, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm transgender. And their parents are like, no, that's not happening here in my house. If you're that way, then you can get out. And so they end up on the street and they need those basic things to survive. And somebody will approach them, somebody who's very loving and caring and say, I don't care who you love or who you're with. I will take care of you and give you those basic, things. And also that love, that unconditional love that they were kind of seeking for. And so this person, they can look to them as a parental figure. They can look to them as a romantic figure. And so this person will provide these things, for the next several weeks or months. And then at some point, this person will tell them, hey, they may do it in a very manipulative way and say, hey, in order to maintain this lifestyle that we're living, I need you to go out there and work and get a job and bring back money to us, and so that we can take care of us and our family. And so they'll tell them, but the only way that you're going to be able to make money is not, you're not going to be able to get a job like at McDonald's or anywhere, because nobody's going to hire you because you're transgender. I love you the way you are, but they're not going to accept you. And so the best way is for you to go and, sell yourself. And so they will go on the street and, sell themselves in order to make money for their family. And they feel like, oh, I'm doing this for my family and taking care of and providing. And sometimes the person will do it in a very violent way, and they will start sexually assaulting that person, physically assaulting them, threatening their life, threatening their family's life. And even though their family can come out, they still love and care about them. They don't want anything bad to happen to them. So this person will threaten them and force them out there to sell themselves. And so a lot of times when transgender people end up on the street and these things are happening, the person who's kind of doing that manipulation, they don't see this as somebody forcing you to do this, but they don't see the other side of it, that if they decided to stop, how this person may react. Is this person going to become violent? Are they going to do these things? Are they going to threaten me? But in that instance, they're like, I'm providing, I'm helping for my family. And then they may end up getting sexually assaulted by these Johns that are out there and they're selling themselves to, those kinds of things. But at that point, they feel like, well, I can't go forward to the police. I can't go forward to an agency. I can't do anything to help because I put myself in this situation and I experienced the sexual assault because of me selling myself. And then I'm prostituting myself. So that means that if I call the police or a police report, I'm going to get arrested and legal charges are going to be brought against me because, I'm selling myself. And so getting clients to really understand, like, there's a big difference between prostitution and human trafficking. And so human trafficking, there has to be three things present: force, fraud, and coercion. And so if somebody is forcing you to do something, if you're committing fraud, if there's some coercion going on, then that's human trafficking. And so I try to always explain to my clients in a very simple way. If I decide that I'm going to go prostitute myself, and I go sell myself, then if I put 100% of that money into my bank account, meaning, I'm not giving anybody a cut, it's going into my purse or into my bank account, then I am prostituting. But if I have to give my brother, mother, father, significant other, my pimp, whomever it may be, a cut of that money that I make while I'm selling myself, that is human trafficking, because that person is requiring you to give part of your money to them as a result of doing this act. And so that's human trafficking. And you have rights in order to get, out of the situation and get help. Especially if you experience a sexual assault, you have the right to call the police and these things. especially if somebody's forcing you out there to do it. But a lot of times they feel like I can't come forward, and when they do come forward, they tend to get victimized because they end up getting arrested. I have clients that have like 13 felony prostitution because after the third strike of a prostitution, you start to get charged as felonies, and so they're like, I don't want to go back to police. I don't want to get help because they just make the situation worse. And unfortunately, that happens with a lot of our clients, and they're out there doing these things. They don't want to do them. They don't know if there's any way out and all those kinds of things. And so they tend to think, oh, well, this is my fault. If I wasn't doing this sexual assault would happen to me. And even those who are being manipulated by this person and they feel like they're doing this as a way to help their family, they don't see this as human trafficking at all. They don't see it as, this coercive rape type thing happening. They see it as, oh, well, it's not something I really want, but I'm doing it for my family. And so even if you ever drive down Bel Air, I mean, even right now with COVID happening, you drive down Bel Air or off of 45 South and the Gulf Freeway and Howard, even Telephone Road, if you're familiar where that's at. I don't live too far from there, but I saw two women yesterday when we were going to pick up some food. Basically pretty much exposed almost, still out there kind of selling themselves. And even thinking in that context, like those women most likely are probably not out there doing that for themselves. Probably out there doing that because their pimp has them out there, or somebody has them out there. And still, this is still happening, even though this is, COVID's happening, so we practice social distancing, not doing anything, and just thinking in the context of our community and how they're not, we're kind of like on a soft open, that we are open a little bit, but only for those like emergency situations, stuff like that. How a lot of these communities are they're being victimized right now. We're seeing a higher increase in, domestic violence and sexual assault, child abuse, all these things are happening. And thinking in that context of our community and what's happening. And so, but they don't feel like they can come forward and get the help from the police. And then when they do from the police or from agencies, they tend to get re-victimized, or they don't get help because of that. There's no legal things there to protect them and keep them safe. And then, even like when they go to the hospital and they experience sexual assault, the hospitals a lot of times are like, well, I don't know how to handle them. We have clients that come and say, well, I sat, after I was sexually assaulted, I sat in the hospital for like 15 hours on a chair. I just wanted, like, I couldn't stay that way anymore. I had to go clean up because they just told me they didn't know how to handle me. And so in that context, I did learn later that I don't know how to handle you didn't necessarily mean because you're transgender, but that's what they're hearing in their mind. That meant I'm transgender, they know how to handle me. But later I did learn from, some of the sane nurses that I do go out and talk to that not every hospital has sane nurses. And which is just very unbelievable to think, because we're such a big city, and you would think that every hospital would have to have at least one sane nurse or that training to do rape kits and those kinds of things, but not every hospital has that. And so a lot of times those people have to be transported somewhere else to a hospital that has that same nurse to be able to do those rape kits. And so, they had even told that person, well, we have to transfer you to TMB, which I didn't understand why, because they were in Haiti. But so even in that context, they're like thinking, well, this is because I'm transgender, and that's why they don't want to help me. They don't know how to help me. And it just also goes back to the fact that if they're hospital personnel or anybody who is engaging with somebody who's transsexual, especially a trans person, basic things about talking about their pronouns, and even though they're biologically born a male and they're identifying as a female, even ask them what kind of nurse you prefer to. At that moment, they may prefer a female nurse, they may prefer a male nurse. It just really depends. And so talking to them in that context of what makes you feel safe, what can I do to help you, just on that basic human level, not because you're transgender. But it can be really hard for transgender people to navigate whenever, they have to have an exam, those things with the doctor. Just thinking about that in the context. And so, transgender people feel like they just don't have that extra help and stuff. And we see that way too much when we come in contact, like when I have that client. He had no idea about hate crimes and how she could protect herself and fight for herself and advocate for herself, even though she had this partner that loved her and was there to protect her, or she thought so. And like I said, the red flags for me was like, I think he's more so using her to take care of him, but she didn't see that as the case. But we have clients, that experience like these horrible things because they are a part of it. But getting out there and educating and all those things has definitely helped because talking to HPD and educating them and our first responders is really important because I've had some good stories that people will, I had one girl who was transgender come to me and say, I'm thinking about killing myself because I experienced physical assault, attempted sexual assault. She was in the laundry room of her apartment. This is most transgender people experience violence and have something that has happened in their life. She was one of the ones transgender people that I met that didn't experience these things. This was the first time in her life to ever experience it. And she was just in her laundry room of her apartment doing laundry, talking normal like you would have with your neighbor or something. And she told they're just normal, she had a boyfriend and all these things, so she didn't think he was hitting on her or anything like that. And then at some point he just attacked her. And she was really struggling with that because she felt like now when she looks in the mirror that she was a monster. She was this beautiful girl that nobody would ever know she was transgender. She had a job, she had a boyfriend, she was, very productive part of society. And so once it happened to her, she was like, does everybody look at me a monster now? I think I'm a monster when I look in the mirror. She was thinking about, killing herself. She was really struggling with all the anxiety and depression. And so, but with her situation, when I got her, the police had done an amazing job that they stayed with her at the hospital after the assault. They connected her with the FBI. They did everything they believed was a crime before she even woke up from, she was like in like a mini coma there for like 2 days. And they've done everything to take care of her and protect her.
Angelique, the sound is fading in and out a little bit. I don't know if you're leaning away from the microphone.
Okay, sorry. Is it better
Much
now?
better. Yeah.
I see like the thing was blinking, so I didn't know like it was just losing reception or what. So with her, I don't know if you've heard about the client I was just talking about that she was assaulted in her laundry room of her apartment. But with her situation, the police had done everything right when they got, part of the case, took her to the hospital. By the time she woke up, they had already contacted the FBI, did everything. They referred her to the Montrose Center for counseling and support. And so they did everything to take care of her. And so that was a great thing to hear, like, okay, we're getting out there educating and they're advocating and helping our community. And then, her other part was accessing therapy and services here. And we've had times where police have gone out and they've, given them the Montrose Center's information. They've driven them to a shelter, and those kinds of things. So we are hearing some positive things when these types of issues are happening. But we're still hearing those negative things of how first-time responders are treating the community, especially in regards to transgender people and that kind of insensitivity that they experience on many levels, not just within that first-time responders, but even if they go out to an agency, a lot of times it's like, well, there's not much that we can do for you, or there's not many services out there for LGBT people or in regards to transgender people. And so transgender people just feel like I don't have a voice, I don't have any, and in the way society views transgender people, it's kind of very polarized in that they see some people, everybody sees kind of transgender people either have it all together or they don't have it together at all. Meaning that, you see Caitlyn Jenner and she came out and it appeared to be easy for her because she has family and support and money and all these things. And then we see these other transgender people that we hear, oh, they're assaulting people in bathrooms and they're homeless and they're on the streets and they're violent and they have mental health. And we don't see like what's really going on here in the middle. And that most transgender people just want to be who they want to be. and live a normal life like everybody else and use the bathroom with how they identify, and have nothing to do with wanting to harm anybody. And like I always try to tell people, transgender people, especially think, when it comes to somebody who was born biologically a female and they identify as being a male, if they use a male restroom, and they use a male restroom, they have a higher chance of being sexually assaulted if men in the restroom find out they're biologically female than a transgender person assaulting somebody else in a restroom. But getting to understand the community, and I think it's just the biggest thing of that unknown and that fear of unknown of what's going on, and that's, most people think, oh, being transgender is weird or there's something wrong with them. But if you get to know somebody who's transgender and talk to them like they're just a normal person like everybody else, and want the same things that everyone else wants, that love, support, stability, and to access to the same services. We all deserve to have equal protection when it comes to, the laws protecting us, and be able to have a job and to rent a house and all those kinds of things. And that's not the case for somebody who's transgender, in regards to living in the state of Texas. There are other states that do recognize people who are transgender as hate crimes. And, they have the right to employment and all those kinds of things. But unfortunately, Texas is not one of them. And so it's really important that we are getting out there, and we have a outreach team that goes on to Harris County Jail and to different places, the clubs, all those things to kind of help them know that we're here. We're a resource for them to access if anything happens. There's PREA that we work with, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, which is the prison. It's something to do with sexual assault within the prison. So if they happen to have something like that at Harris County Jail or in a prison, they can contact us and we can be their advocate if they experience a sexual assault. So there are a lot of things that we're doing. We are part of the Harris County Domestic Work. I can't talk now. Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. We're part of the agency that all the counties come together and talk about sexual assault within the community. So we have a voice at that table as well. We're also part, which is MIXA, that's the multi-interagency sexual assault coalition. And then we're also part of the mayor's human trafficking committee as well. And to get out there and, have a voice for the community and trying to get that recognized and also educate everybody about the community is really important. So people can understand more about how we can advocate and help this community. Thank you, Melanie. I couldn't remember what it was for PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act. So so we work with Harris County with that. And so anytime they call, we will go and we will be their advocate for that LGBT person. Something I recently learned about the Harris County jail system, which I think they have PREA and these kinds of things, but they do have different color bands they wear when they're in the county jail. So different colors, yellow, blue, red, green, I think it's something like that. And different color bands, whatever level they are. So if they like a violent crime, they're a certain color. If they're at risk of harming themselves, or maybe they've attacked one of the guards or something like that, they have different color wristbands. And so I'm understanding that if you're part of the LGBT community, you wear a yellow one. And so I understand they're trying to help, keep those people on the same floor and protect them, but also that also outs them and also let other people know that, hey, they're yellow, that means they're part of the community. So I know there's systems trying to help it, but also harm it as well. So we're talking about different things to like better, protect the community in that setting, especially transgender survivors and people that experience sexual assault within our community. And I'm sorry about the sound. I didn't realize I didn't over the chat until now. So yeah, that's and talking in regards to transgender survivors. We typically don't see them come forward until something really bad happens or has happened, or they're really struggling with, like I said, that one client. She did have the police help her with all that situation, but she didn't access therapy until it was to the point that she's like, I think I want to harm myself. And that's when she reached out to us to get that assistance in therapy. So some barriers to services I had a question. Is there any way to be involved with the fight to get basic human rights for trans? So somebody asked, is there any way to be involved with the fight to get basic human rights for trans? So, I mean, that's definitely something that we're trying to do. One of the big things was Prop 1. I don't know if y'all remember that. Was like last year sometimes during the, I'm kind of already run out, yeah, maybe it was the year before last, that they presented Prop 1, but they made it out about the bathroom bill, like I mentioned a while ago. It was about transgender people are going to harm you or your children in the bathroom, when really Prop 1 was about equal rights across the board for everybody. People of color, gender, everything, gender equality, LGBT recognition, all those kinds of things, is what Prop 1 was about. So that was kind of one of the first fight, at least within the state of Texas, for that basic human rights for just everybody across the board. But they spun it for the bathroom bill to make it not pass, to kind of instill that fear. And so there have been those things that people are trying to, fight for and get that basic rights across the board. But unfortunately, the way things look, sometimes people make it look a certain way when it's really meant for something else. And so, we're still fighting that, and trying to advocate for the community, and just advocate for everybody in general. But yeah, it's an uphill battle. And hopefully someday, we didn't ever think that, gay marriage and that right to be able to be married would ever happen, and it did happen, and hopefully it will stay active. And so hopefully in time we will get to that point where everybody has those basic human rights across the board. Somebody said they still saw women out there working on the street, and for some reason, or I even thought they would not be forced to work during this pandemic. So sad. Yes. So yeah. Unfortunately, those women are probably being even more so forced to work right now, because we're already kind of fearful of COVID and, contracting it. So to limit that like interaction period is what people want to do. Even those who are out there, having to be forced to sell themselves, and that person's still doing that because it's still, a supply and demand type, thing. And especially where there are people kind of don't have anything to do right now and just kind of sitting at home and not working, that's one of the things that's going to kind of probably skyrocket, is having that, either, a prostitute or doing those types of things and then making money still in that way. We got to kind of stay productive and still make money. So that's a way that they can do that, and kind of work around it, unfortunately. And so they're still having to work out there, and probably more so being forced to do it now because of that fear. They don't even want to contract COVID. And then how are they going to get, services or go to the hospital or reach out or getting those kinds of assistance? And so I've definitely seen an increase in our hotline calls for people who are either in domestic violence situations right now, or may have recently experienced a sexual assault, or especially our transgender people who are like, I need to get off the street right now because it's not safe for me. And they're not saying, oh, because, of sexual assault situation or being forced to prostitute. But a lot of times that's what, I get from them. It's like, I can't be out here because it's not safe. And we know it's not safe at all for anybody. So when they say those kinds of things, I'm kind of reading between the lines, because it's a lot of things that I hear, especially within the trans community. And I think I share everything. Okay, so in regards to barriers to services within the community, there's lack of appropriate referral services. There's not a lot of services out there that offer assistance for sexual assault, especially in regards to LGBT sexual assault. We do have a domestic violence housing shelter type program if a client qualifies for it. And so we don't have that in regards to the only time that we only are able to help with sexual assault is if the person who experiences sexual assault is living in the same household as the person who is the perpetrator of the assault. then sometimes in those special situations, we can reach out and help them with shelter and housing to get away from that person that they're living with. There are limited training for first-time responders. So like I mentioned, we are getting out there and educating more first-time responders to be able to help the community in regards to violence they experience. Lack of media representation. So we don't see a lot of things talked about when it comes to people experience sexual assault in general, much less the LGBT community. It wasn't until the Me Too movement that we kind of started hearing more about sexual assault and how much it happens, and that it actually happens in the LGBT community. I have a lot of people, will say, well, that, domestic violence and sexual that happens in that community, like, yeah, it happens to everybody, and even more so in our community at a higher rate. And so getting people to understand that this is something that is big and happens is important. And I definitely, recently talked to somebody about like with the whole COVID thing happening and how, we have a lot of people who are contracting COVID and how it's a pandemic. But, I also told them like, this is horrifying that this is happening in, our world. But when we think in the context of somebody who experiences sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking, substance abuse, like we have more people experiencing that, those are pandemics that have been happening in our world for so long that we kind of sweep under the rug or don't really, look at or focus on. That, we could kind of target the way we're trying to target the COVID-19, target these situations. There would be less sexual assault. There'd be less of these things happening if we really would do that same, aggressiveness towards these kinds of things that are happening, because, more people experience or have, even died from certain things like this, like human trafficking, with our transgender community. The life expectancy of a transgender person is basically like 32 years old, especially a trans woman of color. And so if you think of the context of the LGBT community, their life expectancy is around 80 years old. But if somebody who is trans, it's very, very low. And so they are most likely going to experience some type of violence or even maybe die as a result of being transgender, especially a woman of color. And unfortunately, Texas right now is leading we have the highest amount of transgender deaths in the United States, especially of trans women of color. And so even thinking in that context, like we've come a long way when it comes to recognizing LGBT community and trying to support them. But then when we see these numbers, there's a big discrepancy as how much are people really supporting the community and how much are people still very, very against the community and trying to keep, it at bay. And we're seeing that with the violence that is being perpetrated on the community, especially trans people. And so seeing that in that context is really, really difficult because we're trying to get more awareness, but also seeing these things happening, especially in Texas. So internalized homophobia and transphobia is another of the big barriers that keep people from coming forward. And then some of the things we offer, we have a 24-hour hotline. So anyone can call to get that help. Like I mentioned earlier, and possible housing assistance, but the abuse for domestic violence, but can be for this special circumstances of sexual assault. We help with hospital accompaniment. So if somebody during the normal working hours, if somebody is in the hospital needs help, I will get person to go out there. As of right now, I know they're not allowing advocates. They are able to do with the advocate, either talk to the person on the phone or even do like a tele thing that we can, a telecommunication thing where we can have a FaceTime or something like that, the person can be an advocate and something. And you can't hear me again. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. We're able to do that right now with the hospital stuff if they do end up at the hospital. We help with police and legal accompaniment if they're needing any of those things. protective orders. Obviously, with the sexual assault, if you don't know the person, you can't get a protective order. But if it's somebody they know, we're able to help with that. We help with crime victim compensation. We help with getting that VINE registry, which is the Victims Information Network. Every day, I think is what it's called. And that's if they know the person who sexually assaulted them, they can register over the phone, online, through text message, and then give them real-time information about the person who is in jail, if they're being released, any change of their court dates, and all those kinds of things to keep them updated in real time. We offer individual and group therapy. So with that, they get on a grant, and they can get free services. It's not required, but they can get that help if they want it. And then they also have case management services they can access as well. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I want to thank y'all for being here and for participating and for the questions you did ask. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you so much for being here. And if you have any questions, I know that Melanie has my contact information. I'm sure she'll send it out if you need any help or have any clients that need any assistance. And then any of the other, like the LGBT alphabet, if you're needing that, I'm sure she can send that out as well. But thank you so much for having me and for being here. And y'all all stay safe and take care. Can't wait till I do this in person. I prefer this in person.
Thanks, Angelique. You did a great job. I'll be sending out a recording link as well as the alphabet once I get that. And you guys should have it probably by Monday. So if you need anything else, please feel free to reach out. Have a great rest of your afternoon.